Although Gunvein is promoted and usually talked about as an NGDev Team game, it is actually a collaboration between that studio and an I think unaffiliated developer called Boghog, who kindly supplied me with this review copy. And the reason I'm starting this review by making this clear is that I suspect many people who watch this channel will have played previous NGDev Team games and will be familiar with their style, a style which Gunvein does not adhere particularly closely to, although as it is a collaboration, there are also a lot of notably NGDev Team style elements in there too. Now, depending who you ask, this change of style may be considered to be something good, bad, or indifferent, but as far as I'm concerned, Gunvein is the best thing the studio have put out so far, and despite some little issues that will probably be familiar to anyone who's experienced their past output, I consider it to be an absolutely essential purchase for anyone who plays shmups on Switch, particularly those of you who like a bullet hell flavour to your gameplay. Now, arguably, the defining feature of Gunvein's gameplay is its sheer relentlessness. The game spends almost every second assaulting you from the moment you hit start to the moment you clear the final stage without any significant let-up. For the most part, I applaud this way of doing things, although I do have to say it maybe pushes this aspect just a little too far in a fashion that I'll discuss in a bit more detail when we come on to the presentation. As mentioned, the game is a danmaku, so not only are the attacks relentless, the patterns are also often thick and intense. They're also faster moving and more aggressive than in many bullet hells, and coupled with some equally aggressive systems on the player side, all this comes together to give Gunvein a very distinctive game feel, and one that I personally loved. The game, I think, very deliberately creates an extraordinarily intense, head-down, skin-in-your-teeth atmosphere and tempo that sees you always on the edge. And if you're down with that sort of no-let-up exhilaration, I'm very confident you're going to love this too. To survive this onslaught, you have 5 main attacks assigned to 3 buttons. First is just a regular shot, and you'll be basically holding this button constantly. Second is a focus shot, which narrows your spread and slows your movement speed. However, holding this same button also activates your secondary shot, with this varying ship to ship. For 2 of the ships, it's a lock-on attack with very different areas of coverage, and for the third, it's a kind of chargeable bomb attack. You then also have a more regular limited bomb, with this also having a secondary effect if you hold the bomb button down that sees you instead granted a moment of invulnerability while your shot powers up into a kind of souped up hyper mode. In other words, the attacks at your disposal cleave fairly closely to what might be called standard bullet hell mechanics, while also adding some extra little wrinkles here and there to give things a more unique flavour. The most interesting and unique aspect of the gameplay, however, is how you acquire your bombs and or the resources needed to launch your hyper. See, in Gunvein you do not see the occasional bomb pickup which you then grab and hey presto, you now have an extra bomb. Instead you collect bomb fragments, with these being far more numerous than usual bombs, and necessarily so, seeing as you need to collect 10 to actually acquire 1 bomb. You generate bomb fragments by killing enemies, and do so more quickly by speed killing them. And of course, one of the best ways to speed kill enemies is by using a bomb, meaning that if you can pull off optimally, you're going to want to be making use of your bombs rather than hoarding them, since this is in fact the best way to generate even more bombs. This is a great system as it realises that using bombs is fun, and giving the player the opportunity to use them as part of their regular arsenal can really add to the thrill of playing. This is also the game's main scoring system, with higher points being awarded both for speed killing enemies and point stars being generated when taking them out with a bomb. However, something that took me a while to notice is that despite having a big visual impact and being able to take out reams of popcorn enemies at once, your bombs do not actually deal such a huge amount of damage when being used against larger foes, most notably bosses. In fact, it's your hyper attack that's often best for both getting you out of a jam and dealing more reliable damage, not least because activating it only uses up 5 bomb fragments. The fact you see so many of these bomb fragments also adds further to the hectic feel of the game, since there's rarely a time when there's not at least 1 on screen, and therefore, as well as dodging the never-ending hails of bullets, you're also almost always scrabbling about trying to make sure you're in place to catch as many bomb fragments as you can. Bomb fragments, by the way, are often hidden under destructible spots in the background, and if you're fighting a large enemy such as a mid-boss, they get kind of saved up and only released when you start taking out more popcorn enemies, causing a very satisfying cascade of pickups. All these mechanics come together, I would say, in a pretty close to perfect fashion. People familiar with the genre are going to feel right at home with the fundamentals straight away, while there are several little wrinkles and details that make things unique and require a bit of practice to get into the swing of. However, there's nothing that's overly complex or is going to throw off those less familiar with the genre, and the core mechanics and gameplay loop manage to pull off that tricky balancing act of appealing to experienced players and newbies alike very well. And indeed, the whole game is set up to try to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. There are 4 difficulty options, including a new handheld setting for the Switch release, which does things like increasing the size of certain bullets and adding a brighter outline to bomb fragments to aid visibility when playing on the Switch's small screen. To be honest, I found things pretty much fine anyway, especially when playing in the excellent taffy mode, but the effort is certainly very much appreciated. There's also a stage select where you can keep a score for each individual stage, and a practice mode that allows you to set various parameters, including, most crucially, your starting position in the stage down to quite specific moments, something that majorly mitigates the absence of save states. There are nicely done leaderboards with scores separated by difficulty and ship chosen, but these are local only, and while it's a little disappointing not to have online boards, I've played a few games recently where even the local boards were a bit messy, so simply having those clearly set out and well organised isn't something to be sniffed at. There's also a mission mode, with this containing both gameplay missions to play through such as score attacks and boss rush, each with checklists of achievements to aim for, as well as some of the most extensive tutorials I've ever seen that cover not just the controls and mechanics for Gunvein itself, but try to give new players a crash course in the fundamentals of shmup gameplay by explaining techniques you can use and practice here, and then take into either the main game or indeed almost any other arcade shmup you'd like to try your hand at. There are tons of visual and meta options too, far too many to cover here, beyond saying they are extensive. The biggest draw in terms of extras, however, is the roguelike mode that rejigs enemy formations, etc. with each run and grants you upgrades to an initially weakened base ship, so you can mix and match the qualities of the 3 normal playable ships as you progress. I'd seen a lot of talk about this mode pre-release, but I have to say, while I do think it is a pretty awesome addition as an extra, I do feel like that's all it is, and the idea that it might be even more appealing than the main game itself seems to me somewhat overblown. It is a lot of fun, but for me personally the arcade mode is 100% still the meat and potatoes of the experience. That said, I've only had the game for under a week, so maybe once you've mastered the 5 main stages, this addition becomes something more important, but I am a long way from that stage yet, and for now at least, I still just see it as a bonus mode with 90% of my playtime still concentrated on the main game. I'm sure mileage will vary massively with this one though, and some people may find themselves putting large amounts of time into this mode, and particularly for those who treat shmups as one and done affairs, this ought to provide a lot more incentive to keep playing and stop them complaining they spent 15 to 20 bucks on something that was over in 30 minutes. Turning to the presentation front, and this is an area of the game that is kind of hard to sum up succinctly. Both ship designs and backgrounds are very attractive with clean lines and lots of detail, and on a technical level it is hard to find any fault with the visuals at all. However, that said, there's not all that much personality to them. The backgrounds in particular kind of remind me of what you might see on a self-published sci-fi book cover, by which I mean they seem more illustrative rather than taking on the mantle of being the thing itself. Something not helped by there being something of a disconnect between the background and the playable field, with there rarely being any interaction between the two, and it mostly just feeling like you're floating above a nice and pretty but slightly generic picture, rather than flying through a world or location. There's also a bit of a lack of variety in both design and palette, which when coupled with the earlier covered relentless nature of the gameplay, can lead to things feeling a bit one note at times. Now, I do want to say, I'm only being so critical here because Gunvein is such a great game, and so the tendency is to compare it with some of the best examples of the genre. If the mechanics and gameplay were more average, I'd probably just say the backgrounds are well drawn and leave it at that. But in this case, what's lacking becomes more apparent when you look at what other classics do to add that sense of variety that's missing here. I'm thinking of things like in Crimson Clover, a game that in many ways also has just a fairly generic sci-fi theme, but in which you have things like the section that drops you inside a volcano, or the mix-up in atmosphere that comes in Stage 3. Or if you look at Mushihime-sama and the way it has a nice consistent theme in Stages 1 and 2, but then adds in a set-piece stage for Stage 3, and a special notably different atmosphere for Stage 4, before returning to that original theme for Stage 5. Even just little moments like the initial ship drop from Dodonpachi games can add a lot, but there's really nothing like that here. And it's not just visually and in terms of atmosphere, it's pacing too. I really do not want my shmups to feature long, drawn-out, drifting sections where you do nothing, but the occasional short break can add drama to proceedings and mix up the flow of the game, and I feel like that too is something Gunvein lacks. And it's a similar story with the music. It's very fitting, very professional, and always kick-ass. But again, that's kind of the problem. It's always kick-ass, meaning it doesn't have the same rise and fall in intensity that the best soundtracks deliver. Now obviously, with the comparisons to Mushihime-sama and Crimson Clover, we are holding Gunvein up to an impeccably high standard, as these are some of the very best shmups of the last couple of decades, and that is kinda unfair. If we instead compare the presentation to more recent releases, the richness and detail of the visuals is actually probably more of a standout feature than a negative, but I think it should be taken as a testament to how highly I think of the game that it's even appropriate to draw comparisons with those older classics. Because at the end of the day, that is the kind of level Gunvein is approaching. Is it as good as the very best cave efforts? No, not quite. But is it as good as pretty much anything anyone has produced during the Switch's lifetime? Absolutely yes. In short, this is one of the best new shmups around, and if you like bullet hell, with its great gameplay and plethora of extra features, picking this up is an absolute no-brainer. I'd give Gunvein a 9 out of 10, and I really hope it's going to get the audience it deserves on Switch. If you played this on Steam already, or if you're picking it up now on Switch, let us know your own thoughts on the game below, and thanks as ever for watching. See you next time. Cheers.